The conference room was filled with quiet conversation and the soft shuffle of papers when my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced down, expecting maybe a reminder or a text from a friend. But it was a call from Brandon.my husband. I stepped out into the usual, how's the trip? Or when will you be home? Instead, his voice came through with a sharpness I hadn't heard before, cold, detached. I'm divorcing you, he said, like he was announcing the weather. I already sold the apartment, so you'll need to figure out where you're going to live. I remember standing there, frozen, phone pressed to my ear, as if I'd misheard him. My stomach dropped, not just because of what he said, but the tone he used. There was no regret, no hesitation, just smug triumph. You sold the apartment? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Yeah, he said, with a short laugh. Samantha and I need the money to start our life together. She deserves better than that tiny place anyway. Samantha. So that was her name. I had suspected for months, the late nights, the sudden trips, the emotional distance. But to hear him say her name like I was the outsider in their life, that was something else entirely. Something inside me clicked. Well, I said calmly. Good luck with that. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Not yet. My name is Valerie Brooks. And until that phone call, I believed I had married a man I could trust. Brandon and I had been together for 6 years. We worked hard to buy our apartment, a modest 2-bedroom, downtown, that I fell in love with the moment I saw it. It wasn't just a home. It was a symbol of everything I thought we had built together. But that call? That was the moment I realized something crucial. I'd been building alone. And the man I thought I knew was already gone. Looking back, I can't say there weren't signs. Brandon had always carried himself with confidence, the kind that filled a room before he even said a word. In the early years, I admired it. I mistook it for ambition, for stability. He was the one who handled the finances, negotiated with the bank, talked to the realtor when we bought the apartment. I told myself it made sense. He was good at those things. He liked to lead. But over time, that confidence began to feel more like control. Whenever I asked questions about our budget, he'd wave me off with a smile and a kiss. Don't stress about it, babe, I've got it handled. When I asked if we should put money aside for emergencies, he'd scoff. You're always so worried. We're fine. And if I brought up my concerns too many times, he'd get irritated, call me paranoid. I started shrinking around him without realizing it. I second-guessed myself constantly. I told myself I was lucky to have a husband who was so on top of things. But the truth is, Brandon wasn't taking care of me, he was keeping me out. He never let me look too closely. Never included me in the real decisions. He framed it like protection, but it was power. Subtle, quiet power. And I gave it to him willingly because I loved him. Because I thought that's what trust looked like. We had good moments, sure. Vacations where we laughed like best friends. Lazy Sundays watching movies on the couch. He could be charming, sweet, even. That's what made it all so confusing. I held on to those moments like they were proof that the rest wasn't happening. But in hindsight, it was all part of the pattern. He created a world where he made the rules and I was just expected to follow. He didn't yell. He didn't hit. He didn't have to. He made me feel small in quiet, calculated ways. And worst of all, I let him. Because I didn't want to believe that the man I married could hurt me. But that phone call shattered every illusion I had left. And for the first time in years, I saw clearly. It was never about love. It was about control. After the call, I walked back into the conference room in a daze. I nodded at the right time, smiled when I was supposed to, but my mind was spinning. Brandon thought he'd pulled the rug out from under me, that he could kick me out of my own life and move on without consequences. But he'd overlooked one important detail. Earlier that year, we had refinanced the mortgage to get a lower interest rate. It was Brandon's idea, and as usual, he was the one who pushed the paperwork. But at the time, something had told me to get involved, just a quiet instinct, a whisper in the back of my mind. So I did. I spoke with the loan officer myself. I asked questions. I requested the deed be transferred to my name alone during the refinancing process. It was legal, clean. Brandon had agreed without a second thought, eager to lock in the better rate. He didn't bother to read the fine print. He just signed, assuming everything would always work in his favor. It was his arrogance that saved me. When I got back to my hotel that night, the hurt started to harden into something else, resolve. I wasn't going to cry or plead or try to convince Brandon to change his mind. I was done playing small. If he wanted a fight, fine. But this was a fight I planned to win. Picked up the phone and called Jessica Cole, my best friend since college and now one of Fifesnary Dowd and Conjal College and now one of the sharpest realtors in the city. She answered on the second ring. Brandon sold the apartment, I said, my voice steady, even though my hands were trembling. Without my consent. But the deed is in my name. She was silent for a moment. Then, is he out of his mind? He thinks he already won, I said. He doesn't even know I changed the paperwork months ago. The next morning, I was on a flight back home, calm on the outside, but sharp and focused on the inside. The kind of calm that comes when you know exactly what needs to be done. The moment I landed, I called Jessica again. We've already contacted the buyer, she said. Explained the situation and provided documentation proving you're the sole owner. They were not happy. I could almost hear her smirking. Let me guess, I said. They're furious with Brandon. Furious might be an understatement, Jessica replied. They're pulling out of the deal. And if Brandon took any deposit money, which it sounds like he did, they're ready to take legal action. I felt a flicker of satisfaction. He had tried to destroy me and ended up walking himself into a legal disaster. Jessica had already drafted a formal letter and sent it to Brandon's email, outlining the illegality of the sale and the potential consequences. Fraud, misrepresentation, civil liability. It was all there, laid out in black and white. He hadn't responded yet. I went straight home from the airport. The apartment looked the same, but something about it felt different. Like the energy had shifted. It wasn't just a place where we used to live. Now, it was the battlefield where I would take my life back. That evening, right on cue, Brandon came storming in. He was red in the face. His phone gripped tightly in his hand. What the hell is this? He shouted, waving the letter from Jessica. You're telling me I can't sell the apartment? It's half mine. I didn't flinch. No, Brandon, I said calmly. It's not. The deed has been in my name for months. You can't sell something you don't own. He looked like I'd slapped him. You're lying. No, you signed the papers yourself. During the refinance. You didn't even read them, did you? For the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. Not because of what I'd done, but because he realized I wasn't the pushover he thought I was. Brandon had underestimated me. And now he was starting to see just how big of a mistake that had been. H stood in the middle of the living room, breathing hard, like he'd just run a mile. But it wasn't exhaustion, it was panic. Pure, cornered animal panic. You think you're so clever, he spat. This doesn't change anything. I already made a deal. You're going to look like an idiot when it all falls apart. I met his gaze without blinking. The sale is already void, Brandon. The buyer knows it, and they're ready to sue you if you don't return the money. That deal you're so proud of, it's dead. He opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. And if you've spent any of that deposit, then we're talking about a whole different level of trouble. For a moment, he hesitated. His bravado cracked, just slightly. You don't know what you're talking about, he muttered, eyes darting to the side. Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about, I said, stepping closer, my voice quiet but steady. You've spent years making me feel small, like I wasn't smart enough to understand what was going on, like I should just stay quiet and let you handle everything. But guess what, Brandon? I let the silence hang for a beat. I've been paying attention. And now, you're going to deal with the consequences. He started pacing the room, waving his arms, sputtering about how I was being dramatic and overreacting. You can't just kick me out, he said, spinning toward me. I live here too. I raised an eyebrow. Actually, I can. Legally, this apartment belongs to me. You can stay for now, but only because I'm giving you the courtesy of time to figure out your next move. But let me be clear, Brandon, I'm not going anywhere. He stared at me, searching for the version of me he used to manipulate. But she wasn't standing in front of him anymore. Over the next few days, the messages started. Voicemails, texts, some angry, some desperate. He flipped between begging me to reconsider and threatening to fight me in court, but none of it worked. While Brandon unraveled, Jessica tightened every legal knot. The buyer officially rescinded the agreement. Brandon now owed them thousands. The threat of fraud charges loomed over his head like a storm cloud. And Jessica began drafting the divorce paperwork. You're in a strong position, she told me. He has no leverage. Not anymore. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally on solid ground. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I was at the dining table, going over some documents Jessica had sent, when the front door opened. I looked up and saw Brandon walk in, followed closely by a woman with sleek hair, a designer bag, and heels that didn't belong on our old hardwood floors. Samantha. She looked around the apartment with a smug smile, her arm wrapped around Brandon's like they'd just walked into their new home. So, this is where we're staying? She asked, her voice light and full of entitlement. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding, but my resolve locked in place. No, I said evenly. This is where Brandon was staying. You won't be staying here at all. Her smile twitched. She glanced at Brandon, confused. What is this? He asked, frowning. This, I said, motioning to the space around us, is my home. Not yours, not hers. And definitely not a crash pad for two people who think betrayal comes without consequences. Samantha's face fell, her lips parting slightly as if trying to catch up. Brandon, on the other hand, was seething. You're being unreasonable, Valerie, he said, his voice rising. For you can't just throw me out of my own home. I walked toward them, stopping just a few feet away. You already threw yourself out the moment you decided to lie, cheat, and sell something that wasn't yours. And yes, I can throw you out. Because legally, this is my apartment. Samantha turned to Brandon, her smile long gone. Wait, what is she talking about? Her voice was sharp now. You said you sold this place. That we had the money. He fumbled for words. It's complicated. I'm handling it. Oh, it's not complicated, I cut in. He tried to sell a property he doesn't own. The sale's void. He committed fraud. Samantha stepped back, her expression morphing from confusion to horror. Fraud. She repeated, almost in a whisper. Are you serious? Dead serious, I said, crossing my arms. And if he doesn't get his things out by the end of the day, I'm pressing charges. Brandon's posture crumbled. Come on, Valerie, we've been together for 6 years. You're not really going to do this. I stared at him for a long moment. You already did this, I said. I'm just finishing what you started. Samantha looked between us, her face pale. You told me you had everything under control, she said, her voice rising. You lied to me. He reached for her, but she pulled back. I'm not getting dragged into this, she snapped. And just like that, she turned and walked out. Brandon stood there, stunned and speechless. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. After Samantha left, Brandon didn't say another word. He stood frozen in the living room, staring at the door like he expected her to come back. She didn't. I let the silence hang for a moment before I spoke. You need to pack your things, I said quietly. You have until the end of the day. He looked at me like he wanted to argue, but he must have seen something in my face, a firmness he hadn't expected. He just nodded, picked up his bag and walked into the bedroom. For the next few hours I stayed in the kitchen, sipping tea and listening to the sounds of drawers opening, hangers clinking, boxes being taped. The slow unraveling of a life I had once thought we were building together. Melissa, my best friend, came by that evening. She brought takeout and a bottle of wine, like she always did when the world felt heavy. Is he really gone? She asked, peeking down the hallway. Gone, and not coming back, I said, handing her a glass of wine. We sat on the couch together, surrounded by the calm aftermath. The apartment felt lighter, brighter, like it had finally exhaled. We spent the evening boxing up the last of his things, his gaming chair, the jerseys he insisted on framing, the ugly coffee table I never liked but let him keep because I thought compromise was the key to a healthy marriage. Now, those compromises just looked like clutter. How's he taking all of this? Melissa asked, tossing one of his ties into a donation pile. Not well, I said with a smirk. He still thinks he can talk his way out of it, but I'm not budging. She raised her glass. To finally standing your ground. I clinked mine against hers, to never letting anyone bulldoze me again. That night, for the first time in months, I slept with the window open, the breeze moving through the room like a quiet reminder I was free. No more secrets, no more control, just me and the space I had fought to reclaim. It wasn't just about an apartment. It was about finally coming home to myself. Over the next few days, I started to reclaim the apartment piece by piece. I moved the couch to face the window, where the light poured in during the morning. I replaced the artwork in the hallway with pieces I actually liked, prints I had bought years ago, but never hung because Brandon said they didn't match the vibe. I even tossed out the dark curtains he loved and put up soft white ones that made the whole room feel like it could finally breathe. It wasn't just redecorating, it was healing. Every drawer I organized, every picture I removed, every small change I made, it was all part of taking my life back. With every step, I felt lighter, more grounded. I had spent so long trying to make things work, trying to hold together a version of happiness that was never real. Now, I didn't have to try anymore. Jessica called one afternoon with an update. Her voice, as always, was calm and firm, the kind of voice that reminded me I wasn't alone. The fraud charges are off the table, she said. The buyer decided not to pursue them, but we've documented everything. The divorce paperwork is moving forward. He's been advised to cooperate. Just hearing the word free made something in my chest loosen. It wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about finally being released from years of subtle manipulation, emotional exhaustion, and the quiet erosion of my self-worth. Brandon had reached out a few times since Samantha left. His messages were a mixture of regret and guilt. I made a mistake. One text read, "Can't we at least talk?" Another was more desperate. "You're going to ruin me, Valerie. Is that really what you want?" I didn't answer. For once, I didn't feel the need to fix anything. Not the past. Not him. Not the idea of what we could have been. He had made his choices, and now he was sitting in the mess he created. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was done. And in that quiet certainty, I found something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. A week later, the apartment didn't just look different, it felt like an entirely new space. Warm. Quiet. Mine. The papers were signed, the loose ends tied. Brandon didn't put up a fight. I think he finally understood that there was nothing left to bargain with, no room for charm. No second chances, not this time. There was no dramatic ending, no last-minute confession, just silence and a clean, final break. One afternoon, while sorting through the gore in the hallway, I found a photo of us. Me and Brandon, from our early days. We were standing on the balcony of our old apartment, arms around each other, eyes full of hope and possibility. I stared at it for a long moment, letting the memories wash. There had been good times. There had been laughter. But those moments had been swallowed by all the things I'd ignored: his dismissiveness, the manipulation, the lies. That photo didn't hurt me anymore. It just reminded me how far I'd come. I slipped it into an envelope and tucked it away. Not to forget, but because it no longer defined me. Melissa and I celebrated the finalized divorce at a rooftop bar downtown. The city lights flickered around us, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could actually see my future again. To fresh starts, she said, raising her glass. I smiled. To choosing myself. Back at home, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the skyline fade into night. I thought about that phone call, the one where Brandon had laughed, so sure he had the upper hand. He'd thought I would crumble. Instead, I rose. He didn't just lose a wife. He lost someone who loved him deeply, someone who would have stayed through anything if only he had valued her. But I had learned something vital. You can love someone and still walk away. You can mourn what you thought you had while celebrating who you're becoming. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of a life on my own terms. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. Jessica let out a low whistle. Well, he's in for a very rude awakening. That sale is invalid, Valerie. And if he took money from a buyer, we could be talking fraud. That word fraud, it lit something inside me. I wasn't just going to protect what was mine. I was going to make sure he couldn't do this to anyone else again.